broadens its reach.
Healthcare, job employment.
Moving beyond the pulpit.
What do we want?
You have to include what is real. I think we're disenchanted.
They abandoned the institution. They didn't necessarily abandon God.
The Black Church.
Tonight at 9 on WTTW.
PBS Kids, making sure free educational programs are accessible to all children across America. Now with the all-new 24/7 channel, on TV and streaming everywhere. Every child, especially those at risk, can watch PBS Kids shows. After school, after dinner, whenever, wherever. Help give America's children a better chance for success.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center. Programming on WTTW originates from the Alexandra C. and John D. Nichols Broadcast Operations Center. We gratefully acknowledge their outstanding support.
She was a gifted opera singer.
Each song has its own completely distinct profile.
And Marian Anderson's rise to fame came at a time of deep racial segregation.
It was the first concert of its kind, a black artist.
The story of one of the most important singers of the 20th century.
She had the persistence and the perseverance.
A voice like this comes around once in 100 years.
Marian Anderson.
Friday at 8 on WTTW.
Hi, I'm Matt, and you're watching WTTW.
This evening's presentation of Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Polk Brothers Foundation, working to make Chicago a place where all people have the opportunity to reach their full potential.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz is on assignment this evening. On the show tonight.
Now that I have been vaccinated, I feel safer, yes.
Travel and recreational restrictions ease up as coronavirus cases decline in Chicago. We've got the rundown on the latest COVID policies.
We welcome everyone.
4 aldermen on the new welcoming city policy the mayor signed today, plus police accountability, corruption, and more. A new report shows the average U.S. life expectancy dropped by 1 year. How the coronavirus impacted that change. Chicago is declared the most corrupt city in America, and Illinois the 3rd most corrupt state. We hear from the co-author of a new report.
We get inspired by so many lives.
Meet a hospital chaplain who's helping patients' spiritual health amid COVID-19. Safety precautions to keep in mind as the big melt begins this week.
We started virtual programming right away, as soon as the pandemic hit.
And how the Cook County Forest Preserves pivoted to virtual programming during the pandemic. But first, some of today's top stories. U.S. Attorney John Lausch will reportedly keep his job for now. In a statement, Illinois Senators Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth applauded the news. They'd lobbied the Biden administration to let Lausch stay on. Earlier today, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot said replacing Lausch immediately would put Chicago at risk.
Even if there was a specific candidate that's named today to replace him, that person's not going to go through the gauntlet of the background checks, getting on the Senate Judiciary Committee's docket, then being voted by the full Senate any sooner than probably September or sometime later. We can't be without a permanent head of this office as we head into the summer months when things are most challenging.
Lightfoot spoke today about Lausch at an event to mark the signing of Chicago's Welcoming City Ordinance. Phil Ponce discusses that and much more with a panel of Chicago aldermen in just a moment. The city of Chicago is not liable for an off-duty police officer who drunkenly shot a friend. That was the ruling Tuesday from the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, overturning a $45 million judgment against the city handed down by a jury in 2017. Jurors found that the city failed to flag Patrick Kelly as a problem officer. Kelly shot friend Michael Laporta in a drunken incident in 2010. Laporta reportedly now requires 24-hour care. The appeals court found that Kelly was acting as a private citizen rather than a police officer at the time of the shooting. An effort to fire Kelly from the CPD is ongoing. The police officers involved in the death of Chicago native Daniel Prude last March will not face charges. Prude was in Rochester, New York, visiting his brother when he burst onto the street naked during a mental health crisis. Protesters took to the streets to protest his death after police held him down naked and handcuffed him with a hood over his head. In a statement responding to the grand jury's decision Tuesday, attorneys for Prude's family say, quote, "We will continue to advocate for justice in the civil courts while also seeking federal police reform so that these continued tragedies against black citizens end once and for all." State health officials announced more than 1,600 new cases of coronavirus, including 27 more deaths. The total case count stands at more than 1.17 million cases, with 20,330 deaths. And now to Phil Ponce for a preview of tomorrow's City Council meeting. Phil.
Brandis, the city's watchdog issued a scathing report last week saying the Chicago Police Department was, quote, outflanked, under-equipped, and unprepared during the summer protests. A day later, the mayor canceled a meeting on police accountability. Here to talk about that and much more are Scott Waguespack, alderman of the 32nd Ward, George Cardenas, alderman of the 12th Ward and Mayor Lightfoot's deputy floor leader, Carlos Ramirez Rosa, alderman of the 35th Ward, and Roderick Sawyer, alderman of the 6th Ward. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. First off this morning, Mayor Lightfoot signed a welcoming city ordinance, officially ending cooperation between the police department and ICE agents. And here's some of what she had to say.
It's not just a good, feel-good policy. It is something that affects the real day-to-day lives of people in our city who are just here trying to live their lives, support their families, and really realize the potential that this great city has given to all of us.
Alderman Ramirez Rosa, you spoke at today's ceremony. In plain language, exactly what does this new policy mean?
Well, our sanctuary city ordinance used to have 4 exceptions where essentially if you were criminalized, if you were on the gang database, if you were facing charges, CPD could turn you over to ICE. And this was a violation of basic due process rights because you have your right to a day in court, you have a right to, assert your innocence and prove your innocence. And so by removing these exceptions, we're really making sure that our sanctuary city protections apply to everyone and that we can tell undocumented immigrants in the city of Chicago that they don't have to fear to call 911 because that may result in their being deported or being turned over to ICE. So this was a fight 5 years in the making. The aldermen on this panel today were also supportive of this, and it was just really great to finally get this done.
Let's stick with the topic of police. Alderman Cardenas, you're now the mayor's deputy floor leader, as I mentioned, and the city's inspector general, as we mentioned at the top, found that the Chicago police were outflanked, under-equipped, and unprepared during the summer protests. What changes do you see going forward that the mayor might implement to change the way the Chicago Police Department responds to protests in the future?
Well, there's an ongoing review, obviously, comprehensive review of everything that happened. But Chicago was not alone. If you look at New York, if you look at Minneapolis, where it started, L.A., pretty much, a lot of the major cities in the U.S. Really just had this happen to them. It's unfortunate. How do you prepare for a pandemic like this, and how do you prepare for the ensuing riots that occurred? It was difficult to surmise what exactly people were going to do. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't something that anyone here is proud of. But the fact that those police officers assigned to this duty did it to the best of their ability. I thought the mayor did a yeoman's job with trying to corral everybody and making the best decisions possible on the ground. This is not something that it had ever happened. Everybody's Monday quarterbacking this, but at the end of the day, I think she made the right decision. I think we're going to have a plan, something along the lines of north-south. If we need to divide and raise the bridges, maybe we can send troops from the northern part of the districts in the city of Chicago and the same from the south.
All right.
There's going to be a comprehensive review, and I think we're going to get to some rather pretty comprehensive solutions.
Alderman Sawyer, a number of aldermen and activists have expressed concerns about Police David Brown's performance during the summer chaos. Is he up to the job?
Well, the concern I have with assessing him at that point, he was on the job maybe 4 or 6 weeks when the riots occurred. Not to say that that's an excuse, but I will say that the police department as a whole needs to do better with response training in emergency situations like that. And I think that, you know, he got kind of caught short a little bit, but again, I could not say that he needs to go based on that one issue alone, because again, he was just 6 weeks on the job.
Scott Wagesback, does the police superintendent have your confidence?
Well, I think your previous question there, he has to accept responsibility for what happened, even though he was there a short time. But if you look at the structure of police management, of the senior managers, they should have been prepared for this type of situation. The preparedness level was very low. But he's stipulating to the facts here that what the PSIG, the Public Safety Inspector General, has put out are true, that essentially we have structural problems with the police department that need to be addressed, and we need to look at them holistically. I think the good thing about this report is that this is exactly why we created the Office of Public Safety Inspector General, and they've done the job of reviewing this. Now, you've got another part of this that's coming too. You have the consent decree monitor. They have to weigh in on this. Recommendations really weren't made in this 150-page document, but we do stipulate to the facts of all the problems that we saw here. They interviewed senior staff. They interviewed rank and file police officers who saw problems systemically throughout the system here. But they also interviewed people of the public, the protesters who were out there, who had a First Amendment right to protest. And they cobbled all this together, put together, I think, a pretty comprehensive report. We're going to see how David Brown, the superintendent, responds to it and what he comes up with in conjunction with the COPA and BIA investigators who must follow through on the investigations of officers who committed wrongs, but also look at how the consent decree works with the aldermen, with the monitor works with the aldermen and works with CPD to make these significant changes.
Alderman Sawyer, last Friday the City Council was supposed to have had a meeting on police accountability, but the mayor postponed it and critics cried foul. What's going on?
I think the problem that we have with that, we were a little upset that the mayor, from our understanding, has her own ordinance that she's proposing, when the members of GAPA and CPAC have been working for years, crafting an ordinance, accounting for true police accountability. Now, the trick is that we have gotten together, GAPA and CPAC, we're working on the finishing touches right now on an amended ordinance that will address both of our issues and really attack the issue of community oversight over the police. We're that close in getting it done. We're probably 1 or 2 meetings away from finishing it, and we will have an ordinance crafted that we've been working on collectively for maybe 6 years, Carlos, I believe, that we are working for true police reform, community oversight, and really a transformation on how policing is done in Chicago.
Alderman Ramirez-Rosas, should this move to increase police accountability with more civilian input, should that move forward even if the mayor doesn't support it?
Well, look, there's no question that the city of Chicago desperately needs civilian control of the police. It's something that's been identified by the consent decree. It's something that experts of police accountability have said time and time again. You need to empower a civilian commission that has power over policy, that plays a role in hiring and firing the superintendent, and in overseeing police discipline. You know, the GAPA and the CPAC proposals are community-initiated proposals that would accomplish those things. And we have a coalition of 40 aldermen, of hundreds of community groups, of people that are experts in civilian oversight that are working together in good faith to win civilian oversight of the police. And I would hope that the mayor would support those efforts. So as my colleague Alderman Sawyer said, you know, he's one of the chief sponsors of GAPA. I'm one of the chief sponsors of CPAC. We're really close to a really strong, good ordinance here that checks all the boxes of what professors, of what researchers, of what experts have said a civilian oversight ordinance needs to have. Chicago desperately needs a good ordinance, and we need Mayor Lightfoot to support our efforts.
And we're almost out of time, but real quickly, Alderman Cardenas, is the mayor against civilian oversight of the police department at this point?
I don't think so. I think, you know, if anybody is for police reform and accountability, is the mayor. She's the one that led the task force, and this is why she's now mayor. But one of the things that does come clear is the fact that Chicagoans elected her to lead. Chicagoans expect her to put her best foot forward when it comes to some of these changes and reforms that she fought for before she was mayor when she's leading the task force, and we expect her to do that. Look, I just read the Sun-Times. Even the Sun-Times agrees with this. The fact that the mayor must be front and center responsible for police and education in the city, and I happen to agree with that. I think the mayor, the Chicagoans elect their mayor to lead them in more ways than one, and to lead them in infrastructure, to lead them in police accountability, to lead them in educating their children. And that's what a mayor is there for. And aldermen is also elected to lead in their ward.
Thank you. That's where we'll have to leave it for now. Later in the program, though, we'll be joined again by our guests to discuss COVID vaccine distribution and disparities. But for now, our thanks to Alderman Walkersback, Cardenas, Ramirez-Rosa, and Sawyer. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Phil, thank you. Millions of Illinois residents will become newly eligible for the coronavirus vaccine this week, but not in Chicago. The city is focusing on its most vulnerable neighborhoods. It is also relaxing restrictions that have been in place since the start of the pandemic. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with a COVID rundown. Amanda.
Yeah, Brandis, today's temperatures were relatively balmy, not quite beach weather though, and even if it were nice enough to hit the beach, well, most of the access to Chicago's lakefront has been closed off for nearly a year now because of COVID, but that is changing. The Park District announcing that the lakefront can safely reopen, playgrounds and indoor pools too. This is not immediate. In a press release, Park District Superintendent Michael Kelly says the closed off access points to the lakefront east of Lakeshore Drive will be reopened as crews clear away snow. Also, locks will be lifted from playgrounds in the coming weeks. It's not going to be totally back to normal. No large gatherings are allowed and masks are a mandatory accessory. So why now?
When we started taking these changes to pare back access to the lakefront, we were in a very different place with the pandemic, and we were concerned genuinely about the crowds that were gathering and that people were not adhering to the various warnings that were coming not only from me, but from Dr. Arwady and our other public health officials.
Mayor says now people understand what she called the moment that we are in. This comes as Chicago's public health commissioner announced some cheer-provoking news about COVID cases.
As of today, we have the lowest percent positivity that Chicago has seen since COVID arrived in Chicago. Yes, so we are at a 3.2% test positivity.
Chicago also averaging 257 new cases a day, a figure that has been dropping, as have emergency room status and hospitalization rates. Rates also dropping for COVID in some of our neighboring states, which is why that Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin are now among the 18 states that you'll see in yellow on the map. That means that Chicagoans don't have to quarantine after traveling from those places. The city does recommend not traveling to any of the states there in orange. And if folks do, they are supposed to quarantine for 2 weeks upon returning. Adding those neighboring states to the map does not a clear green light for travel. Arwady says, of course, coronavirus is still out there and there is that concern for those more contagious variants. Key to keeping cases down, the vaccine, which today she described as one that will get us past COVID. Among those in Chicago who are getting the priority for a COVID vaccine are residents of homeless shelters who, as part of a targeted campaign throughout the pandemic, have been connecting to those experiencing homelessness with healthcare. Pacific Garden Mission resident Constance Foster is among the 2,200 homeless individuals who thus far have received the shot.
By taking the vaccine today, I want to protect myself from getting COVID again. Now that I have been vaccinated, I feel safer, yes.
Foster happy there as she went on to get that second dose, but the vaccine is still out of reach for many. Even those who are eligible already says there simply is not enough to go around. And that is why Chicago and Cook County are among the localities that will continue to restrict eligibility to healthcare and certain other frontline workers, as well as those over the age of 65. This, even as the state of Illinois, come Thursday, will allow anyone over age 18 with conditions including cancer, heart problems, and obesity to get the vaccine. Governor J.B. Pritzker was asked how the state is going to make sure that folks don't cheat.
I really believe in the integrity of the people of our state. I think that first, most people will go to a healthcare provider that they already know, an FQHC or a clinic that they already are engaged with. They will know what their comorbidities are. So that's helpful. I do think that people will show up and be able to tell what their comorbidities are in an interview with with either a nurse or somebody working with the local health department.
Now, I know I just said that Chicago is not going to be expanding eligibility, but there is a big exception to that. The city really focusing on vaccinating residents in 15 communities that it has ranked the most vulnerable, places like Belmont Cragen, Englewood, Roseland. And there, the city could be opening the vaccine to any resident in a qualifying zip code. Already says this is the right thing to do and sound from the perspective of stopping COVID spread, but that is something that is likely to make those who are trying in vain already eligible for the COVID vaccine, but cannot get an appointment for it. Now, meanwhile, in Washington, Democrats are pushing to get President Joe Biden's COVID relief package through.
This rescue program is designed to put vaccine on the streets, in the clinics, and in the arms of Americans as quickly as possible.
Gonna go full circle here. We started out talking about easing COVID restrictions. Want to say that you cannot look for any major changes for a while now. Illinois' phase 4 limits on gatherings are set to remain in place really for the foreseeable future until more of us, most of us even, are vaccinated. With that, back to you, Brandis.
Amanda, thank you. U.S. residents can expect to live 1 year less, according to a new report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that uses data from the first half of 2020. That decrease in average life expectancy is even steeper in Black and Brown communities. The report shows that it dropped for Black people by 2.7 years, for Hispanic or Latino residents 1.9 years, and by just 0.8 years for white residents. Joining us to discuss what the decrease means are Mercedes Carnathon, Vice Chair of Preventive Medicine at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine, and Dr. David Ansel, Senior Vice President for Community Health Equity at Rush University. He's also the author of The Death Gap, How Inequality Kills, which will be updated and republished this May. Welcome both of you back to Chicago tonight. Mercedes, let's start with you, please. How significant is a 1 year drop in life expectancy?
A 1 year drop in life expectancy, while it sounds small, it is notable. And what is really, the loss here is that these are individuals, some of whom had many productive years of life left, and we're losing ground instead of gaining ground. And we're losing ground on life expectancy against the backdrop of better medical therapies, the opportunity for prevention. Despite all of that, we're seeing losses in life that are disproportionately felt by different members of our community.
Now, the report also shows that Black and Hispanic males face the highest decrease in life expectancy. It reads in part, quote, "The decrease in life expectancy between 2019 and the first half of 2020 was highest for non-Hispanic Black males, whose life expectancy declined by 3 years, followed in order by Hispanic males with a decline of 2.4 years. Dr. Ansel, what does this tell you?
Well, COVID revealed the social fault lines that pre-existed.
and planted its seeds in those social chasms that pre-existed. Take a city like Chicago, where prior to COVID, there was a black-white life expectancy gap of 8.6 years. Overall, the largest in the country. It translates to neighborhood life expectancy gaps, like we've heard, between the Loop, is the census tract level 90 to Englewood, 30 years less, down to 60. So now we have COVID, and this data is just for the first half of the year. So it's the tragic consequences of not addressing the social and structural underpinnings of health. And there's no amount of health and healthcare that can sort of address that. You know, we've saw a lot about the ICU responses and all that other types of things, but if we don't sort of address the social infrastructure in this country in a more intentional, thoughtful, integrative way, we're going, this pattern, which has actually been a long-standing pattern in the United States, out of the last 4 years, life expectancy dropped 3 out of the 4 years. That's before COVID, and it's only half of 2020. So it's dramatic,
and hopefully,
tragic.
I'm hoping that we can get back to that social infrastructure in a little bit as well. But as Dr. Ansel was saying, health disparities among Black and Brown and Indigenous people existed before this pandemic. Mercedes, was this decline to be expected, though still alarming?
You know, it is. My life has been spent describing the epidemiology of cardiovascular diseases in our population. And we have long known that the primary driver of the Black-white gap in life expectancy is heart disease. Now, overlay that with COVID-19, where individuals with heart disease are more likely to suffer severe outcomes from COVID, and we would expect to see this decline in life expectancy. That you see it prominently among men is consistent with our findings that Black men are developing cardiovascular diseases earlier in life. When they contracted those cardiovascular diseases, it then put them at greater risk for suffering severe COVID. So unfortunately and disappointingly, the signs early on in the pandemic pointed to this as an outcome.
And Mercedes, sticking with you just for a second, the data is just based on the first 6 months of 2020. That only includes 3 months of the pandemic. Is this going to be different? Is this going to be worse next year when we look back at the 2020 life expectancy?
In around October, COVID-19 achieved the position of the leading cause of death in 2020. And when that happened, it happened in large part because we were seeing these premature deaths, particularly among communities of color. Right now, the pandemic is shifting whereby older adults are driving. They continue to drive most of the morbidity or mortality or the deaths. However, I think that when we add in the second half of 2020, when we were certainly still seeing Indigenous people, Latinx population, and Blacks suffering higher rates of mortality, I think that these differences in life expectancy could be expected to remain the same or even grow somewhat as more Latinx deaths have become apparent.
And we've got just a limited amount of time left, but we also know the report cites overdose-related deaths as another cause for this reduced life expectancy. Dr. Ansel, are there other causes of death related to the pandemic contributing to this drop in life expectancy?
Yes, I mean, and I think what are labeled as COVID deaths, when we get to excess mortality with later analyses down the road, we're going to find that people died who from probably other causes that might have been related to COVID. It's the co-prevalence of these diseases. I just wanted to frame it in Chicago. About every year in Chicago, about 25,000 people die, many of them prematurely, and that leads to this large Black-white life expectancy gap that pre-existed. COVID, since it started, we've had about 5,000 deaths in Chicago from COVID. That's a huge additional mortality burden. Then you throw onto it despair and misery, and the opioid overdoses in Chicago this year are the highest that they've ever been, and another epidemic on top of the epidemic. And many people say the epidemic is actually things like structural racism and economic deprivation, historical structural causes that we can do something about.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. My thanks to Mercedes Carnathon and Dr. David Ansel for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Up next, a hospital chaplain offers care for the human spirit. Stick around.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight podcast and subscribe.
And there's much more ahead on the show, including details of a new report that finds Chicago to be the country's most corrupt city. But first, one of the key coronavirus metrics that politicians and public health officials have kept a close eye on over the past year is hospital capacity, making sure there would be enough beds for the sickest of COVID patients. But hospitals don't just offer health care. Many offer care for the human spirit as well as the human body. Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg spoke with a chaplain at Gottlieb Memorial Hospital in Melrose Park about the challenges of ministering to patients and families during a pandemic.
Jorge Maldonado has thought about illness and the end of life for a long time.
I was part of my grandfather's own process of dying.
An experience that helped put Jorge on the path he still walks.
I learned how to accept that someone dies. It was not sad for me. It was more like a reassurance of life.
Jorge spent many years in seminary before deciding against becoming a priest. He also spent nearly 2 years as a missionary in Fiji.
And I learned how to, be more in conversation with people about their own faith instead of their religion, because religion is almost an institution, but faith is your own personal beliefs.
A lesson he carried with him when he began training as a hospital chaplain in 2004. Jorge says his ministry has taught him time and again.
There's a great, amount of spiritual strength in everyone. I remember this lady who was in her 80s, close to her 80s, and she said, I need to go home to take care of my mom. I mean, her mom was 103-year-old. And I thought, a lady like her in her age should be taken care, but she is taking care. She's still a caregiver.
As a native Spanish speaker, Jorge is able to provide comfort to patients and families who sometimes find it more difficult to connect with the hospital staff.
It's always appreciated when we can communicate each other in our own language.
In his early years as a chaplain, Jorge says he was sometimes unsure whether he was finding the right words, especially in English. But he learned that sometimes his presence is more important than what he says.
For some people, it's just to show them that someone who's there is not a doctor, is not a nurse, but is going to be by their side.
Being by a patient's side to hold their hand or gathering with a family to pray or to talk, that was all upended last spring because of COVID.
We encourage them spiritually and emotionally through the phone. Nurses use also the iPad. They can go inside and do the FaceTime phone calls.
While the work of a chaplain is adaptable, the work environment has been difficult, sometimes anxious and sad.
Even some staff member would express their anger, not being able to help the patients to recover. I'm 52-year-old, but I've never seen anything with this high of stress.
Earlier this year, Jorge tested positive for the virus he and his colleagues had been battling for months.
It was a struggle, but at the same time, I think at the end I became stronger. And knowing that, I share that with patients who have gone through the same process, and staff as well.
One patient stands out in Jorge's mind, a man in his 40s who came in last summer. He expected to get well. He didn't. He left behind a wife and a baby.
His wife, she said that her baby was the most beautiful gift ever given to her by her husband. That story stayed with me. So it is a lot about hope, resiliency, and also see life continues, even though there was a traumatic end here, but the baby is life, a new life for her.
Despite the toll of illness and death over the past year, Jorge still finds hope, like from his father in southern Chile, a former vaccine skeptic who said he recently got his first dose for the good of his community.
People like him really do care for others. And that's what we need these days, to take care of ourselves and take care of the loved ones we live with and the whole community.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
One other way Gottlieb Hospital provides comfort to patients, a program to give out plush handmade blankets that patients and their families get to keep. Jorge says he thinks of each knot on the blanket as a prayer. Still to come on Chicago Tonight. Watch out where you step because there might be a puddle. Tips for handling the big melt happening this weekend. We talk with 4 aldermen about Chicago's vaccine rollout that's dogged by distribution disparities as suburbanites drive in for shots. Federal charges against Alderman Ed Burke, that's just some of what a new report cites as evidence that Chicago remains the most corrupt city in America.
Or a bouncing or a trill call like a...
And how the Cook County Forest Preserve is live streaming educational programs like 2 Owls and a Naturalist during the pandemic. But first, some more of today's top stories. Chicago area native Merrick Garland's nomination to serve as U.S. Attorney General got a second day of hearings in Washington, D.C. today. The Senate Judiciary Committee heard from several witnesses who praised the former federal prosecutor. He currently sits on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Former Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who famously blocked Garland's nomination to the Supreme Court, told Politico on Tuesday he plans to support Garland's nomination as AG. 1 million children in Illinois will get additional food benefits funded by the federal government starting next month. Governor J.B. Pritzker announced the Pandemic EBT program today, saying access to nutritious food can make the difference in a young person's education and opportunities.
A child whose family is food insecure has tremendous difficulty focusing on school compared to her classmates who don't go to school hungry.
Pritzker says families eligible for free or discounted meals under the National School Lunch Program will receive the extra benefit. Families don't need to apply, but they should be alerted by their child's school. First, it was the big chill, then the big dig, and now the big melt. With temps rising into the 40s this week, all of this month's snowfall is expected to melt and quickly. WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley joins us now with some helpful tips to keep in mind. So, Patty, what does the Chicago Department of Buildings recommend that owners and renters do or keep an eye on as we start to see that melt happen this week?
Right. So a lot of those deathsicles, as people have called them, are definitely starting to melt. What the building department says you want to do is make sure that your downspouts are clear so that the water has a path, that it's not being blocked. And you're probably in the spring going to want to have your gutters inspected if you had some of those deathsicles to make sure that there was no damage. But if you're really concerned about any leftover ice dams or any accumulation on your roof, you really want to call in the professionals and not try and take care of a problem yourself, because you could end up doing more harm to your roof than good.
And speaking of professionals, should we be on the lookout for scams also?
Yes, that is the unfortunate thing about telling people to be on the lookout for professionals, because the scammers out there know that. So the Better Business Bureau has issued a warning to people to be on the lookout, and you should never take the word of somebody who shows up unsolicited. You should definitely never sign a contract. And for sure, a warning sign is if they ask for cash up front to inspect your roof. So unfortunately, people are really kind of freaked out and they're afraid and feel a sense of urgency, but you really want to do your homework before letting someone up on your roof.
And look out, look up, because those deathsicles, as you call them.
Straight up.
But they are very serious. All right, Patty Wetley, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And now back to Phil with members of City Council. Phil.
Thanks, Brandis. Earlier in the program, we discussed police problems and changes, and we're joined again by Alderman Scott Waguespack, Roderick Sawyer, George Cardenas, and Carlos Ramirez Rosa. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Alderman Cardenas, the national coronavirus deaths have surpassed 500,000 people now, as you know, and Chicago vaccine hunters have entered into, for want of a better term, some people are calling the Hunger Games to get vaccines. Is the city doing enough to lessen the imbalance in vaccine distribution?
We're getting to that. You know, by the way, I was on the phone with Sybil, the deputy mayor for accountability, and you know, she gave me the rundown on vaccines, on vaccine distribution. In Little Village, for example, which one of the neighborhoods that was most beset by coronavirus's positivity rate, and also deaths as well. We have now almost 20,000 vaccines committed over the next 6 weeks to vaccinate anybody over 18 years old. We've a significant amount of people have been vaccinated, 65 and older, in those on the program 1A and 1B. You got on Brighton Park and Gage Park, a tremendous effort by Esperanza Health Centers that is vaccinating thousands of people. Nobody's being turned away. They're getting scheduled. The vaccines are there. I was there today for my second shot. I saw a lot of activity. I saw a lot of action. But again, the vaccine's coming now. I think the problem was the vaccine from the federal government wasn't getting here fast enough. It is now coming here in larger amounts, and the city is ready and poised to be able to do that, to be able to vaccinate all Chicagoans.
Alderman Ramirez Rosa, as you know, there are reports of suburbanites coming into the city for vaccines. Many of them are at risk or health workers and so forth. But how does one address that?
You know, the data doesn't lie, Phil. The communities with the most affluent residents continue to get the most access to the vaccine, and the communities that have been hardest hit by COVID-19, with many uninsured and many working poor essential workers, are being left behind. You know, Protect Chicago Plus has been a great start. The 15 programs where it is being rolled out, they have seen an increase in the number of people being vaccinated, but we still have too many Chicago communities that have not been included in this initiative. For example, Brighton Park, or Mosa on the northwest side, a community that I represent. So it's really critically important that we get this right. And we have to understand, working poor people do not have primary care physicians. And so if you are, you know, a very rich, older person, you likely have a primary care physician. You've probably already had an opportunity to be vaccinated, have been vaccinated. If you're a working poor essential worker that's uninsured or underinsured, you really need a robust government program like Protect Chicago Plus to reach you to get access to that vaccine. So I'm going to keep pushing the Chicago Department of Public Health and Mayor Lightfoot's administration to strengthen that program, because too many communities like Hermosa and Brighton Park are still being left behind.
Let me just say before, because I want to talk about Brighton Park. It's not factual. Brighton Park is being attended to. People are getting vaccinated, and so maybe other communities are now beginning to see that they're getting started. But Brighton Park is definitely not one of those. Thank you.
Roderick Sawyer, what are you seeing in your community as far as the equitability of vaccine distribution?
The concern that I have is getting enough good information to people that have concerns about the vaccine. We have a pretty robust campaign. I was at St. Bernard where people, their concern was people not showing up for their scheduled second doses. So that was a concern. But a lot of the concern I have, particularly in my Inglewood area, is that people are concerned, rightfully so, about is this safe? And you know, I believe that it's safe, but I think there's not enough information being disseminated to the masses to talk about its efficacy as far as the vaccine is concerned, because Black people in particular have history and recent history to back up why they should not take vaccines. But I think that me getting the shot in public was my way of showing people that you should at least look into it, judge for yourselves, but take this as a serious look because we need to get rid of this pandemic, and we need to get rid of it quickly.
Alderman Sawyer, let me stick with you for a second. Alderman and Congressman Rush have been calling on the U.S. Postal Service for changes. They've been asking for help with how the Postal Service is operating. It's a federal issue, so what can be done at the city level, Alderman Sawyer?
Well, we continue to have to shine a light on it. I just got mail for the first time Sunday, which I got mail delivered Sunday for the past week. So I'm one of those frustrated recipients trying to get my mail. I get calls all day. That's probably one of my #1 calls for service right now the last couple of weeks is mail delivery. And it is frustrating because we don't have direct control over that. But what we need to continue to do, like on this shows and others, is to shine a light. We need help. If that means we have to replace the postmaster in Chicago, we have to do something better in our respective post offices. Let's get that done, because we have people looking for medication through the mail, checks through the mail. You know, people survive based on mail delivery, and people aren't satisfied with what's going on currently. So we have to do better.
Alderman Waguespack, real quickly, as you know, former Alderman Dick Simpson, who's up next in the show to talk about his new report that Chicago is the nation's most corrupt city. Does that come as a big surprise to you?
No, not that we're in competition with other cities, but we've made some significant changes in the ethics reforms that we put forward over the last year and a half. I've talked to fellow aldermen about ways to strengthen that, but a lot of this has to do with different levels of government and how they operate. And I think what we need to see is, just continued comprehensive work on the ethics side of things. I've talked to, aldermen who, for instance, former Alderman Dick Simpson. I've talked to former Alderman David Orr about things that they saw in the past and how we could make significant strides still to make those changes. It's, it's not just about what we do comprehensively in the council. I think it's the way we operate our committees. I've made significant changes there that, I'd like to see continued into the future. But we still have a long way to go, but I think we're making some good strides.
And that's where we will have to leave it. Our thanks to Alderman Waguespack, Sawyer, Cardenas, and Rosa Cardenas. Ramirez Rosa Cardenas. Ramirez Rosa.
Thank you.
And now Brandis.
Wait.
Thanks, Phil.
We go back to you, Brandis.
He does know their names. Phil, thank you. Chicago remains America's most corrupt city, while Illinois is the country's third most corrupt state. That is the grim finding of an annual report from the University of Illinois at Chicago released yesterday based upon public corruption statistics compiled by the Department of Justice and other sources. Joining us now to talk about that report is one of its co-authors, UIC politics professor and former alderman Dick Simpson. Dick, welcome back to Chicago Tonight. So,
I'm glad to be here.
You published the report yesterday, but the data it relies on, it's based on DOJ stats from 2019. Briefly, if you would, take us through some of the key findings in this report.
Well, we find that 2019 was sort of a banner year of corruption for both Chicago and Illinois. Over 2018, for instance, the city of Chicago had twice as many corruption convictions here in metropolitan Chicago. The state jumped significantly in the number of total corruption convictions. So we were doing better for a while, but we slunk back into deep corruption in 2019 and very significant cases. Alderman Burke's case, which was mentioned, but also all of the people surrounding Mike Madigan and the Commonwealth Edison scandal, nor are the suburbs free from corruption. We had the red light camera case, for instance, and we also had, even in a small town like Harvey, enormous numbers of corruption cases.
Now, from 1976 to 2019, the DOJ recorded a total of 1,770 convictions, federal convictions, we should say, for public corruption in Chicago. Now, that's an average of 41 per year. And if you only count the decade from 2010 to 2019, Chicago is only the 6th most corrupt city when you look at those particular years. Is that, Dick, would you say that's a sign of success and failure in that, if lots of people are being convicted, does that mean the law enforcement, they're doing a good job of catching it?
Well, the good news is that over the last decade, up until 2019, we were starting to have a decline in the number of corruption convictions, but part of that was just the the way the corruption cases roll out. I predict in this year and next, we're going to have banner years of corruption because there are all of these major cases around Alderman Burke and Solis, around Mike Madigan and all of his followers in Springfield, among a number of state legislators and among suburban officials. So when all of these go to court and get tried, now that the federal courts will be reopening, we're going to have a slew of corruption cases. And Alderman Walsbach is correct that there have been things done by the city council that are quite good in improving the laws, but we're not there yet. That's what 2019 shows, and that's what the pending cases show for the future, the immediate future of Chicago and Illinois. We've got to do better, and mostly that means eliminating machine politics.
Well, on that note, why do you think it is that Chicago is always at or near the top of cities with corruption problems? Is it a function of the so-called Chicago way?
It is the Chicago way or the Chicago machine. Some of that is eroding. Originally, when the Shackman cases got started in the 1970s, there were 35,000 patronage workers, the courts found. And by the time Richard M. Daley came along, there were only 5,000, and that number keeps declining for the city of Chicago and the other local governments here. But they haven't gone to zero. And patronage also lends itself to corrupt contracts. It ends up doing favors for people who support the party candidates. All of the places that have the high levels of corruption, like Louisiana, like New Jersey, all of them have a history of machine politics. The places that don't have machine politics, like most of the western and southwestern states, don't have corruption at anywhere near the levels that Chicago and Illinois do.
Now, at the state level, we have seen longtime House Speaker Michael Madigan brought down by the ongoing federal investigations and the public perception of corruption. Even though he himself has not been charged, he has denied any wrongdoing. But why are Illinois state politics apparently so much more corrupt than other states?
Because we have a machine here in Chicago that's a Democratic machine, and downstate we have a Republican machine. And both of them have worked to make the laws very flexible and allow patronage and corrupt contracts and allow favoritism to the voters. And that's a long history. Our history of corruption goes back before we were a state. It's over 150 years long. The first criminal convictions were of city council members and county board members here in Chicago back in 1865. And the first real machine was formed in Chicago in 1871. So we have 150 years that we have to overcome.
That's a lot to overcome, and you've already predicted banner years for corruption for 2020 based on what we already know, so we'll have you back in a year. I'm sure we'll talk again before then about corruption again. Dick Simpson, thanks for joining us.
Glad to do so.
Up next, how the Cook County Forest Preserves is keeping up its programming during the pandemic. But first, a look at the weather. Animals that wouldn't be able to survive on their own in the wild are getting the care they need and being used to educate the public at 5 Forest Preserve nature centers around Cook County. But during COVID-19, people aren't allowed to go inside these centers, so the animals and their caretakers reach out virtually. Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia traveled north of the city to River Trail Nature Center to learn more.
Eastern screech owls are a common owl. This is full size. He doesn't get any bigger than this. He looks like a baby, but this is it.
Cook County Forest Preserve's naturalist Ryan DePaul is showing off 2 birds of prey today. An eastern screech owl, one of the smallest owls found in the region, and one of the largest, a great horned owl.
We are able to work with these birds because they have an injury where they can't survive in the wild on their own. These birds come to the nature center where hopefully we can give them a good home, a good quality of life.
DePaul says this great horned owl's broken wing healed in a way that keeps it from flying. This eastern screech owl injured its eye, making hunting and survival in the wild nearly impossible.
As I am talking and introducing the birds that you're going to see today, please feel free to share any comments or any questions that you have.
Normally, DePaul would bring these owls to schools or libraries for educational purposes. But in the COVID-19 era, programming like Two Owls and a Naturalist is live-streamed from the River Trail Nature Center in Northbrook, one of 6 forest preserve nature centers in Cook County.
This is our visitor center, so people would come in, see the live animals on display, talk with the naturalists.
Forest Preserve's program manager Nina Bakke says the district pivoted to virtual programming as soon as the county shut down in March.
Two Owls and a Naturalist is focused on the owls here in Cook County. They're amazing adaptations. It's a fun way to engage people. Who doesn't like to see a live animal? But our other programs consist of, history programs, art programs, fitness programs. We try to keep it varied so we can attract as many people as possible.
Now, although the indoor spaces of the Forest Preserve's 6 nature centers have been closed due to COVID-19, these centers still offer free activities, events, and programs, like free snowshoe rentals, which come in handy during this heavy snow.
They're carnivores, so they require that meat. So that's what we're giving to them basically every day. Yeah.
Today, naturalist Jerry Ateri says quail is on the menu. And if logging on to a live stream or snowshoeing don't cut it for you, visitors can check out birds of prey and a coyote in the outdoor enclosures of nature centers.
So this guy has been with us, I think, going on about 8 years now. In the wild, a large bird of prey like this might live 12 or 15 years. In captivity, hopefully it lives to be as many as 30 years, which,
oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
While COVID has altered educational programming, the county kept Forest Preserve trails open throughout the pandemic.
There's so many indoor activities that we're prohibited from now. It's great to have an opportunity to be out in the outdoors. And throughout this pandemic, we have not closed the preserves. And that's an opportunity for people to get exercise and sunlight and be in nature, and that's good physically and spiritually.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Evan Garcia.
It's pretty good with those snowshoes. A Cook County Forest Preserve spokeswoman says in 2020, the district lost more than $3 million in non-tax revenue, like camping fees and permits, compared to the previous year. However, she says the majority of the Forest Preserve's funding is generated from property taxes, which has softened the financial blow to the district's budget. For a full list of all 6 Forest Preserve nature centers, you can visit our website. And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. City Council meets to discuss the police department's response to last summer's protests and why a legendary Chicago musician's life fell apart this year and what brought him back. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.